My name is Claire, and I am 33 years old. I was wrong to marry you. My husband Bradley said those exact words right at our dinner table. Then he demanded his wedding ring back and threw me out of the house. I calmly gave the ring back, packed my things, and left without shedding a single tear. The next morning, I realized I had left my grandfather's antique pocket watch behind. I went back to the house. I walked through the front door and I saw exactly who had taken my place. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to people who severely underestimated your worth. I drove my modest sedan back to the $1.2 million Seattle property that Bradley claimed as his prized possession. The morning air was crisp, but my mind was entirely focused on retrieving the silver pocket watch from my bedside table. I unlocked the front door expecting silence. Instead, the sharp pop of a champagne cork echoed from the living room, followed by loud, raucous laughter. I walked quietly down the hardwood hallway. The smell of expensive catering filled the air. I stepped into the sunken living room, and the scene before me made my blood run cold. Bradley was standing by the marble fireplace, passionately kissing a young blonde woman. I recognized her immediately. It was Brittany, the 25-year-old junior real estate assistant who worked for my brother-in-law. Sitting on my custom suede couch, cheering them on with champagne flutes in hand, were my own sister Alyssa and her husband Jamal. Jamal is an African-American luxury real estate agent who always made sure everyone in the room knew exactly how much money he made. He poured more champagne into Brittany's glass while Alyssa clapped her hands in delight. No one looked guilty. No one even jumped when I cleared my throat. Bradley slowly pulled away from Brittany and smirked. He did not look like a man caught in an affair. He looked like a man who felt he had finally upgraded. "What are you doing here, Claire?" he asked casually, taking a sip of his drink. "Did you come crawling back to beg for alimony already?" I stood my ground, gripping my purse tightly. "I came for my grandfather's watch. That is all." Brittany giggled and leaned her head on Bradley's shoulder. Alyssa rolled her eyes and stood up, smoothing her designer dress. "You should just leave, Claire." My sister sneered. "You are ruining the celebration." Bradley finally woke up and realized he cannot spend the rest of his life with a woman who sits in her pajamas all day drawing worthless app interfaces. Brittany is a high-class woman who knows how to treat a successful sales director. "You are 33 and still calling yourself a freelance designer. It is pathetic." Jamal stepped forward, flashing his perfectly bleached teeth. His expensive tailored suit contrasted sharply with his aggressive demeanor. "Actually, Claire, it is good you showed up," he said, reaching into his leather briefcase. He pulled out a thick stack of legal papers and threw them onto the glass coffee table. The bold letters at the top read, "Quitclaim deed." "Sign this right now," Jamal demanded, tapping his expensive pen against the glass. "Bradley has been paying the mortgage on this house for 5 years. He earned every bit of equity in this property. I am listing this house on the market next week, and my commission is going to be massive. You are going to sign away any marital claim to this property so we can get it sold quickly." Bradley nodded in agreement, wrapping his arm tighter around Brittany. "Do not try to fight this in court, Claire," he threatened. "My lawyers will completely destroy you. They will pull your bank statements and prove you are a penniless artist who contributed absolutely nothing to this household. You will walk away with zero." I looked at the legal documents lying on the table and then up at the four faces staring back at me with absolute contempt. My own sister was openly celebrating the destruction of my marriage. My brother-in-law was already calculating the profit he would make off my pain. And my husband, the man who promised to love and cherish me, was standing in my living room flaunting his much younger mistress without a single ounce of shame. I did not cry. I did not scream. I just looked at Jamal and smiled a cold, calculated smile that made his smug expression falter for a brief second. "I am not signing anything," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "And you are certainly not listing this house on any market, Jamal." Jamal scoffed, crossing his arms over his chest. Oh, really? And who is going to stop me? You. You cannot even afford to hire a lawyer to fight us. Bradley makes 3 times what you make. He has the financial dominance in this divorce. You are just a stubborn woman who refuses to accept reality. Bradley took a step forward, pointing his finger directly at my face. You listen to me, Claire, he shouted, his face turning red with sudden rage. You will sign that paperwork today, or I will personally call the police and have you dragged out of here in handcuffs for trespassing. This is my property now. You gave up your right to be here when you walked out last night. I picked up the antique watch from the side table, slipping it carefully into my coat pocket. Then I looked him dead in the eyes, feeling a surge of absolute power. Cops sound great, Bradley, I replied cheerfully, turning toward the hallway. Call them right now. Let us just see whose wrists they decide to put those metal handcuffs on. Jamal intercepted me before I could take another step toward the front door. He lunged forward, blocking my path with his broad shoulders. He snatched the expensive silver pen from his leather portfolio and aggressively jabbed it toward my chest, stopping just an inch from my collarbone. You think you are so smart, Claire? He sneered, his voice booming through the entryway. You think throwing around empty threats is going to save you from reality. Let me educate you on how real estate actually works, since you clearly spend too much time living in a fantasy world. He took another step forward, forcing me to hold my ground. I am a top-tier luxury realtor in Seattle. I close multi-million-dollar deals before you even wake up in the morning. I know property law inside and out. Washington is a community property state, but you have not contributed a single dime to the actual equity of this house. Bradley has been grinding away at a demanding corporate job, paying the mortgage every single month for the last 5 years, while you sit around drawing digital buttons that do not pay the bills. Alyssa chimed in from the couch, her voice laced with venom. Exactly. You have basically been a freeloader your entire marriage. You should be thanking Bradley for keeping a roof over your head. Jamal waved the quitclaim deed in my face, the crisp paper brushing against my cheek. I already ran the numbers, he bragged, tapping the document with his pen. Bradley has built substantial equity. My lawyers will easily argue that your lack of financial contribution nullifies any claim you think you have. If you force us to take this to court, a judge will look at Bradley's income statements, look at your pathetic freelance invoices, and award him the property outright. You will be left with nothing but legal fees you cannot afford. Sign the paper, Claire. Walk away with whatever scrap of dignity you have left before we ruin you financially. Bradley stood behind Jamal, crossing his arms with a smug nod of approval. You heard him, Claire, Bradley said, his voice dripping with condescension. Do the smart thing for once in your life. I did not flinch. I did not back away from Jamal or his aggressive posturing. Instead, I calmly reached into my tailored jacket and pulled out my smartphone. I swiped open the screen and tapped into the King County Public Property Records database. I looked Jamal up and down, taking in his expensive suit and flashy gold watch. Tell me, Jamal, I started, my voice dropping to a deadly quiet register. How exactly did you manage to secure a luxury real estate license without learning how to perform a basic public records search? Jamal lowered the pen, his arrogant smile faltering slightly. What are you talking about? I held my phone up so the bright screen faced him directly. I am talking about the fact that you just boldly claimed Bradley has been paying a mortgage to a bank for 5 years. But if you were half the hotshot realtor you claim to be, you would have checked the deed before trying to bully me out of my own home. I watched his eyes scan the digital document on my screen. I watched his brow furrow in confusion. Bradley has never paid a mortgage on this property, Jamal. Not a single cent. He does not have a mortgage with Chase Bank or Wells Fargo or anyone else. Every month for the last 5 years, Bradley has been dutifully wiring $4,000 to a corporate account belonging to a company called Horizon Holdings, LLC. Bradley scoffed from across the room. Yeah, so what? That is the holding company that owns the mortgage note. It is standard corporate banking. You really have no idea how finance works, do you? I turned my gaze away from Jamal and locked eyes with my soon-to-be ex-husband. "No, Bradley," I replied, my voice ringing clear and authoritative through the massive living room. Horizon Holdings, LLC, does not own a mortgage note on this property. Horizon Holdings, LLC owns this property outright, and I am the sole registered owner and managing member of Horizon Holdings, LLC. The room went completely silent. The smug expression vanished from Bradley's face, instantly replaced by a mask of sheer panic. Alyssa dropped her champagne glass onto the expensive rug, the crystal shattering with a sharp crack. "I bought this house in cash 6 years ago before we even got married." I continued, taking a slow, deliberate step toward Bradley. "I used the inheritance my grandfather left me. I set up the LLC to protect my assets because I knew exactly what kind of greedy people I was dealing with." "You have not been building equity, Bradley. You have not been paying a mortgage. For the last 5 years, you have simply been my tenant, and your monthly wire transfers were nothing more than rent payments." Jamal snatched my phone from my hand, staring at the county records. His hands began to shake as he read the name Claire Horizon listed as the sole proprietor of the holding company. "She is not bluffing," Jamal whispered, his voice entirely drained of its former bravado. "She owns the house." I took my phone back from his trembling hands and slipped it into my pocket. "Since you are just a month-to-month tenant, Bradley, consider this your official verbal 30-day eviction notice. I will have my lawyers courier the formal paperwork to your office by noon tomorrow. You have 30 days to get your things and your new girlfriend out of my property." I turned my back on their stunned, pale faces and walked out the front door, letting it slam shut behind me. I marched down the manicured front walkway and slid into the driver's seat of my sedan. My heart hammered aggressively against my ribs, but my hands were completely steady on the steering wheel. I locked the car doors and pulled my smartphone back out of my coat pocket. Dealing with Bradley and Jamal in the living room had given me a momentary rush of vindication, but I knew Bradley's vindictive corporate nature better than anyone. If he knew I held the deed to the property, he would immediately strike back at the only other asset he currently had access to. I quickly opened my banking app to check our joint checking account. A cold, dense knot formed in the pit of my stomach as the loading screen cleared. The available balance read exactly $0.00. I blinked, staring hard at the glaring digital numbers. Just yesterday afternoon, that account held over $60,000. It was the financial safety net we had supposedly built together from his quarterly sales bonuses and the few freelance checks I deposited to keep up the appearance of a struggling artist. He had completely drained every single cent. My phone vibrated sharply in my palm. A text message from Bradley popped onto the screen. "Good luck paying for those expensive lawyers now." I moved the money to a secure private account. Horizon Holdings might own the physical house, but a penniless artist cannot fight a corporate director in a war of financial attrition. "Have fun living in your car, Claire." I read the cruel message twice. He really thought he had crippled me. He honestly believed he had severed my lifeline and left me entirely destitute. He thought stripping away $60,000 would break my spirit and force me to submit to Jamal's real estate scheme. A harsh, dark laugh escaped my lips, filling the quiet interior of my car. He had absolutely no idea that $60,000 was practically spare change compared to the $15 million resting securely in my private trust. But the malicious intent behind his actions still stung deeply. He wanted me to suffer. He wanted to watch me beg. I needed to ground myself. I needed the one thing a daughter is supposed to be able to rely on when her entire marriage shatters into pieces. I started the engine and merged onto the highway, heading straight for my parents' house in Bellevue. I pulled into the sprawling circular driveway of my childhood home. My parents, Patricia and Richard, had always valued social appearances above all else. Their massive brick estate was a grand testament to the country club lifestyle they worshipped. I walked up to the heavy oak front door and let myself inside. I found them sitting in the sunroom. My mother was sipping her mid-morning mimosa while my father aggressively typed on his silver laptop. They looked up as I stepped into the room. There was no warmth in their eyes, no maternal concern or fatherly affection. Mom. I caught Bradley cheating on me this morning. I said, my voice tight with residual adrenaline. He was in my living room with Jamal's assistant. He drained our entire joint bank account and tried to throw me out on the street. Instead of gasping in horror or offering a comforting embrace, my mother rolled her eyes and let out a long, exasperated sigh. She set her crystal glass down on the glass table with a sharp clink. "Really, Claire," she muttered, rubbing her temples. "You had to come barging in here with this exhausting drama on a Tuesday morning. Alyssa already called us." My father slammed his laptop shut and glared at me over the rim of his reading glasses. "Your mother is right. You brought this entirely on yourself, Claire." I stared at them, completely blindsided by their icy reception. "I brought his infidelity on myself." "Are you actually defending a man who brought his mistress into my home?" My father stood up, his face flushing with immediate anger. "Bradley is a highly successful executive. He needs a wife who matches his ambition. We warned you for years to drop this ridiculous graphic design hobby and get a real corporate job. You refused to elevate yourself. You sat around the house in sweatpants drawing pictures while Bradley went out and conquered the real world. You drove a successful man away because you refused to step up and be a proper wife." My mother nodded in agreement, adjusting her expensive pearl necklace. "Alyssa told us you are making some ridiculous claim about owning the property under a holding company. Stop playing games, Claire. You need to do the right thing and sign that quitclaim deed over to Jamal immediately." I felt the air leave my lungs. "You want me to give my house to Jamal? A house I bought with Grandpa's trust money." My father took a threatening step toward me, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. "You are going to sign that house over, because this family is in crisis, and you are the only one who can fix it. Jamal is in deep financial trouble, Claire. He borrowed heavily from some very dangerous private investors to fund a commercial development that went completely under. He owes them hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they are threatening to come after his personal assets. If he lists your house and takes the massive commission, he can cover the immediate debt and keep those people away from your sister." The puzzle pieces violently clicked into place. The sudden eviction, the aggressive push to sell the property, the drained checking account. It was not just Bradley being greedy. My entire family was conspiring to steal my property to bail out my golden child sister and her fraudulent husband. "You knew," I whispered, stepping back from the people who raised me. "You knew Bradley was trying to force me out, and you gave them your blessing. You are actively helping them steal my home to pay off Jamal's illegal debts." My mother stood up, pointing an accusing finger directly at my chest. "We are protecting this family. Alyssa has a lifestyle to maintain, and Jamal is a good provider who just hit a rough patch. You have nothing but time and your little drawings. You can easily start over in a small apartment. It is your absolute duty as a sister to make this sacrifice." I looked at the woman who gave birth to me and the man who was supposed to protect me. They were not my family. They were parasites willing to bleed me dry to sustain their illusion of perfection. "I do not have a sister," I said, my voice turning to absolute ice. "And as of this exact second, I do not have parents either. Do not ever contact me again." I turned on my heel and walked out of the sunroom, ignoring my father shouting my name. I marched out the front door and got back into my car. They thought I was weak. They thought I would bow to their pressure and surrender my assets to save their precious golden child. They were dead wrong. The war had officially started, and I was about to burn their fake empire to the ground. 2 days passed, 48 hours of deliberate silence on my end. I knew Jamal was desperate, but I underestimated exactly how reckless that desperation would make him. On a crisp Thursday morning, my phone buzzed with an alert from a real estate monitoring app I had set up on my property years ago. My $1.2 million Seattle home was officially listed on the multiple listing service. The asking price was a severely undervalued $1.5 million, clearly priced for a quick all-cash sale. The listing boasted a lavish open house scheduled for that very afternoon, complete with catered appetizers and champagne. Jamal was moving with terrifying speed, operating under the delusion that Bradley's tenancy somehow gave him legal authority to sell a house he did not own. He was gambling that he could find a buyer, secure a cash deposit, and force a settlement before I could mobilize a legal defense. He thought he was outsmarting a naive graphic designer. He was about to learn a very expensive lesson in corporate law. I did not show up to the open house in my usual comfortable freelance attire. I drove to my own property wearing a razor-sharp charcoal designer suit, my hair pulled back into a severe knot, and black stiletto heels that clicked against the pavement like weapons. The street was lined with luxury cars. Jamal had clearly pulled out all the stops, inviting his highest net worth clients and fellow elite brokers to secure a rapid sale. I walked through the front door, bypassing the sign-in sheet and ignoring Brittany, who was enthusiastically handing out glossy brochures in the entryway. The living room was packed with potential buyers admiring the custom woodwork and the expansive view of the city. Jamal was holding court near the marble fireplace, boasting about the pristine condition of the property. I did not yell. I did not cause an immediate chaotic scene. I simply joined a small group of interested buyers and began a loud, methodical campaign of sabotage. I admired the fireplace Jamal was pitching, and then turned to the wealthy older couple beside me. "It is a beautiful facade," I said, my voice carrying clearly over the soft background music. "Such a shame about the black mold issue behind that custom stonework, though. The contractor quoted $40,000 just for the remediation." The couple gasped, stepping back from the fireplace as if it were radioactive. Jamal's head snapped in my direction, his eyes widening in horror. Before he could intercept me, I moved to the kitchen where another group was admiring the stainless steel appliances. "The Sub-Zero refrigerator is a nice touch," I announced, running a hand along the granite countertop. "Too bad the entire kitchen wiring is fundamentally faulty. The main breaker trips every time you run the dishwasher and the microwave simultaneously. A major fire hazard, really," the buyers murmured nervously, setting their champagne glasses down. Jamal lunged across the room, grabbing my elbow with a vice-like grip. "What the hell do you think you are doing, Claire?" he hissed, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. I yanked my arm away, brushing my sleeve as if he had soiled it. "I am simply providing full disclosure to potential buyers, Jamal. It is a legal requirement in Washington state. You would know that if you were a legitimate realtor." Jamal's face contorted with absolute fury. His grand open house was rapidly disintegrating as buyers began whispering and edging toward the front door. He pulled out his phone, his hands shaking with anger. "You are done," he spat, dialing a number. "I am calling neighborhood security. You are trespassing and disrupting a legal commercial event. I am going to have you dragged out of here and arrested." I stood perfectly still, folding my arms across my chest, as Jamal shouted into his phone, demanding immediate assistance. Within minutes, a stern-looking security officer pushed his way through the dwindling crowd of buyers. "Officer, remove this woman immediately," Jamal demanded, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She is a disgruntled ex-wife trespassing on my client's property and harassing my buyers." The officer turned to me, his hand resting cautiously on his utility belt. "Ma'am, I am going to have to ask you to step outside," he said firmly. I did not move. Instead, I calmly unclasped my leather briefcase and pulled out a certified copy of the property deed, along with my state-issued identification. I handed the documents directly to the security officer. "Actually, officer, I believe you need to remove him," I said, my voice steady and commanding. "This property is owned entirely by Horizon Holdings, LLC. I am the sole managing member of that corporation. I have not authorized any sale, any listing, or any open house. That man is a fraudulent real estate agent illegally attempting to sell a home he does not own." The officer reviewed the deed, his brow furrowing as he compared the name on the document to my ID. He looked up at Jamal, his expression shifting from authoritative to deeply suspicious. "Sir," he said, his voice echoing in the now painfully quiet room, "this document clearly shows Horizon Holdings LLC as the sole owner. Do you have a signed listing agreement from the corporate entity authorizing this event? Jamal stammered, his face draining of all color. He looked wildly around the room at the few remaining wealthy clients who were now watching him with undisguised disgust. It is a marital dispute, Jamal choked out, pointing at me. She is trying to steal her husband's equity. The officer handed my documents back to me and stepped toward Jamal. I do not care about your marital dispute, sir. I care about property rights. You are currently trespassing on a corporate-owned estate without authorization. You need to clear these people out and vacate the premises immediately, or I will contact the Seattle Police Department and have you charged with criminal trespassing and fraud. Jamal stood frozen, utterly humiliated, in front of the very elite clients he relied on for his livelihood. His grand scheme had crumbled into dust, and he was now the one being publicly evicted from the property. The morning after the open house disaster, I sat in my favorite corner booth at a local downtown coffee shop. The rich aroma of roasted espresso usually calmed my nerves, but today I was operating on pure adrenaline. I was reviewing the digital drafts for my next interface design when the bell above the cafe door chimed aggressively. I did not have to look up to know who it was. The heavy stomping of expensive leather shoes gave him away instantly. Bradley slid into the booth opposite me uninvited. He was not alone. Sliding into the seat next to him was a man in his late 50s, wearing a sharkskin suit and an expression of permanent disdain. The man set a thick leather briefcase on the table, rattling my coffee cup. Claire, Bradley sneered, his face still flushed with residual anger from yesterday. You really outdid yourself with that little stunt at the open house. You humiliated Jamal and you embarrassed this entire family. Do you have any idea how many elite clients he lost yesterday because of your unhinged behavior? I took a slow sip of my coffee, refusing to break eye contact. I protected my corporate assets from a fraudulent sale, Bradley. If Jamal lost clients, it is because he is a criminal attempting to sell property he does not own. The man next to Bradley cleared his throat, a harsh grating sound meant to command immediate attention. He pulled a silver pen from his breast pocket and clicked it sharply. I am Arthur Vance, he announced, his tone dripping with condescension. I am Bradley's legal counsel. I specialize in high-asset divorce litigation. My client has informed me of your hostile actions regarding the residential property, and I am here to assure you that your little LLC trick is not going to save you. You have been playing a dangerous game, Claire, and playtime is officially over. We are prepared to make your life a living hell if you do not immediately surrender the deed and compensate Jamal for his lost commissions. I slowly closed my laptop. You ambushed me at a coffee shop to deliver empty threats, Mr. Vance. That seems rather unprofessional for a high-asset litigator. Vance leaned forward, resting his forearms heavily on the table. His eyes narrowed into cold, dark slits. I do not make empty threats, Mrs. Wilson. I win cases. Bradley has been the sole financial provider for the duration of your marriage. Washington is a community property state. A judge will look at his 5 years of diligent mortgage payments. I held up a finger, stopping him mid-sentence. Rent payments, I corrected smoothly. He paid rent to my company. Vance waved his hand, swatting away my correction, as if it were a minor annoyance. A judge will see it as commingled marital funds used to maintain a primary residence. But that is not even the worst of your problems. We did a little digging into your recent financial activities. Bradley told me you are a freelance digital artist who barely makes minimum wage. But my investigative team found out you recently finalized a business transaction. Bradley crossed his arms, a triumphant smirk returning to his face. We know about your little software project, Claire. We know you sold that educational drawing app you have been working on in your sweatpants for the last 3 years. You hid marital assets from me. Vance slapped a manila folder onto the table. When we file for divorce next week, we are not just going after the house. We are filing for immediate and permanent spousal support. You sold a business asset acquired during the marriage without disclosing the profits to your husband. Bradley has grown accustomed to a certain standard of living, and since you now have a sudden influx of cash from selling your little project, we are going to ensure he gets his rightful cut. We will freeze your accounts, audit your LLC, and drain every cent you made from that sale in legal fees if you try to fight us. Fight. You think you are so clever hiding a few $1,000s from me, Bradley sneered. You are a fraud, Claire. You let me pay the bills while you secretly hoarded your little app money. I want spousal support. I want my legal fees paid. And I want half of whatever pathetic sum they paid you for that useless digital coloring book. I did not flinch. I did not gasp. I looked at the manila folder on the table and then up at the two men who thought they had just cornered me. I let out a soft, genuine laugh that made Bradley's smirk falter. It was not a little software project, Bradley. I said, my voice steady and crystal clear. It was an advanced ED tech interface designed specifically for autistic children. And I did not sell it for a few $1,000s. I acquired a patent and sold the exclusive licensing rights to a major Silicon Valley tech giant. Vance's eyes darted to Bradley and then back to me. His professional mask slipped for a fraction of a second. How much, he demanded, his tone losing its polished edge. $15 million, I stated plainly, watching the color drain entirely from Bradley's face. The wire transfer cleared my private offshore trust account 3 days ago. Bradley's jaw dropped. His eyes bulged as his brain struggled to process the number. 15 million. He repeated the words as if they were a foreign language. $15 million. You have $15 million. His shock lasted exactly 3 seconds before pure, unadulterated greed flooded his features. The anger vanished, replaced by a manic hunger that made my stomach turn. He slammed his hands down on the table, leaning so far forward he nearly knocked over my coffee. 15 million. He breathed, a frantic smile spreading across his face. Do you hear that, Vance? She has $15 million in cash. Washington is a community property state. Whatever she makes during the marriage is split straight down the middle. That means $7.5 million belongs to me. I am entitled to half of that money. You hid $7.5 million of my money, Claire. Vance quickly recovered his predatory composure, adjusting his suit jacket. My client is absolutely correct. You have just confessed to hiding massive marital assets. We will subpoena your offshore trust immediately. You are going to write a check for $7.5 million. Mrs. Wilson or I will have you prosecuted for financial fraud and divorce proceedings. Bradley was practically vibrating with excitement in the booth. $7.5 million, he repeated, running a hand through his hair. I am going to be rich. You thought you could screw me over with that house deed, but you just handed me the lottery. I looked at my husband, watching the man I once loved salivate over money he had absolutely no part in earning. He truly believed he had won. He truly believed the law was on his side. He had no idea what was coming next. Bradley slammed his hand down on the small cafe table, his face still flushed with residual rage from his spectacular humiliation at the open house. He had somehow tracked me down to my favorite downtown coffee shop, intentionally ambushing me during my morning routine. Sliding into the booth right next to him was a man in his late 50s, wearing a tailored sharkskin suit and an expression of permanent disdain. The man set a thick leather briefcase on the table, rattling my coffee cup. Claire, Bradley sneered, leaning across the table to invade my personal space. You really outdid yourself with that little stunt you pulled on Jamal. You embarrassed this entire family and ruined a massive real estate deal. Do you have any idea how much money you cost us? I took a slow sip of my dark roast, refusing to break eye contact. I protected my corporate assets from a fraudulent sale, Bradley. The man next to Bradley cleared his throat, a harsh grating sound meant to command immediate attention. He pulled a silver pen from his breast pocket and clicked it sharply. I am Arthur Vance, he announced, his tone dripping with polished arrogance. I am Bradley's legal counsel. I specialize in high-asset divorce litigation. My client has informed me of your hostile actions regarding the residential property, and I am here to assure you that your little LLC trick is not going to save you from financial ruin. Vance leaned forward, resting his forearms heavily on the table. We are prepared to destroy you in court, Mrs. Wilson. We are going to file for immediate and permanent spousal support. We did a little digging into your recent financial activities and found out you recently finalized a business transaction. Bradley crossed his arms, a triumphant smirk returning to his face. We know about your little software project, Claire. We know you finally managed to sell that educational drawing app you have been tinkering with in your sweatpants for the last 3 years. You hid marital assets from me. Vance slapped a manila folder onto the table. When we file for divorce, we are taking everything. Bradley has grown accustomed to a certain standard of living. Since you now have a sudden influx of cash from selling your little project, we are going to ensure he gets his rightful cut of that money. I did not flinch. I did not gasp or show a single ounce of the intimidation they were desperately trying to provoke. I looked at the manila folder on the table and then up at the two men who truly believed they held all the cards. I let out a soft, genuine laugh that made Bradley's smug smile falter for a fraction of a second. It was not a little software project, Bradley. I said, my voice steady and crystal clear, echoing slightly in the quiet cafe. It was an advanced educational technology interface designed specifically for nonverbal autistic children. And I did not sell it for a few $1,000s to some minor developer. I acquired a comprehensive utility patent and sold the exclusive global licensing rights to a major Silicon Valley tech giant. Vance's eyes darted to Bradley and then back to me. His professional mask slipped as his calculating mind tried to process my absolute calm. How much he demanded, his tone losing its polished edge and dropping into something far more urgent. $15 million. I stated plainly, watching the color drain entirely from Bradley's face. The wire transfer cleared my private offshore trust account 3 days ago. Bradley's jaw dropped. His eyes bulged as his brain struggled to comprehend the sheer magnitude of the number. 15 million? He breathed, a frantic smile spreading across his face. Do you hear that, Arthur? She has $15 million in cash. His shock lasted exactly 3 seconds before pure, unadulterated greed flooded his features. The anger over the open house vanished instantly, replaced by a manic hunger that made my stomach turn. He slammed his hands down on the table, leaning so far forward he nearly knocked over my coffee. Washington is a community property state, Claire, he declared loudly, drawing stares from the barista. Whatever you make during the timeline of our marriage is split straight down the middle. That means $7.5 million belongs to me. I am entitled to half of that money. You hid $7.5 million of my money. I let him revel in his imaginary victory for a few more seconds, watching him construct a fantasy life built entirely on my hard work. Then I methodically unlatched the brass clasps of my tailored leather briefcase. I reached inside and retrieved a thick stack of legal documents bound by a heavy blue seal. I placed the stack flat on the wooden table and pushed it directly toward Arthur Vance. I suggest you read this before you start counting my millions, Mr. Vance, I said, my voice dangerously calm and perfectly level. What is this? Vance asked, staring at the heavy blue seal. That is the original charter and legally binding documentation for the Harrison Family Irrevocable Trust, I explained, leaning back and mirroring his relaxed posture. My grandfather established it 20 years ago to protect our family wealth from exactly this type of predatory behavior. You really should let your expensive lawyer do the talking, Bradley, I continued, my gaze locked on Vance, who was frantically flipping through the dense legal pages. If you actually understood corporate finance or intellectual property law, you would know exactly why you are walking away with absolutely nothing. I folded my hands on the table and outlined the harsh legal reality of his situation. I did not just use trust money to buy coffee while I coded. I used the Harrison Family Irrevocable Trust to entirely fund the research development and patent filing for the software interface. Every single digital asset line of code and proprietary algorithm was financed exclusively through that protected trust. I never commingled a single penny of marital funds to support the project. I never used your salary. I never used our joint checking account. Furthermore, I registered the intellectual property under Horizon Holdings LLC 2 full years before we even met. Vance stopped flipping pages. His finger traced a specific paragraph on the third page, and I watched the remaining color drain completely from his face. His arrogant posture collapsed as he slumped back against the vinyl booth. By law, Bradley, I continued, my voice ringing with absolute finality. An asset developed entirely with protected trust funds and registered to an independent LLC prior to the marriage remains strictly separate property. It is entirely shielded from community property laws. You have zero legal claim to the intellectual property and absolutely zero claim to the $15 million. Bradley scoffed, looking to his lawyer for validation. Tell her she is crazy, Arthur. Tell her we are taking half. Vance did not look at Bradley. He kept his eyes glued to the documents, his mouth slightly open. He slowly closed the file and gave a slight, silent nod to my husband. The smugness completely vanished from Bradley's face, morphing instantly into pure, unadulterated rage as he realized he had thrown away a marriage to a multimillionaire for absolutely nothing. 2 days later, the reality of Bradley's complete failure reached my sister. Alyssa did not handle defeat with grace. When she learned that Bradley had failed to secure a single penny of my $15 million trust fund and that Jamal was still facing imminent financial ruin, she resorted to the only weapon she actually understood: public manipulation. I had just poured a cup of black coffee and settled into my new downtown loft when my phone began to vibrate violently on the kitchen counter. I opened my notifications and found myself staring at Alyssa's tear-stained face on my screen. She had posted a highly edited, heavily filtered video across every major social media platform. In the video, she sat on her custom suede couch, clutching a tissue and weeping directly into the camera. "My sister Claire is a monster!" Alyssa sobbed, her voice cracking with manufactured heartbreak. She has spent the last 5 years financially abusing her hard-working husband. She systematically drained their joint accounts and is now fabricating legal documents to steal his home. She is a dangerous sociopath who is trying to completely destroy our elderly parents just because they tried to stage an intervention to help her. Please share this video so people know exactly who she is and what she is capable of. The video had already amassed tens of thousands of views. The comment section was a toxic wasteland of strangers calling me a narcissist, a gold digger, and a psychopath. Alyssa had brilliantly weaponized the internet's love for a victim narrative. She painted Bradley as a devoted husband who had been blindsided by a cruel, calculating wife, and depicted our parents as innocent victims caught in the crossfire of my supposed mental breakdown. She even tagged Bradley's corporate firm and several local news outlets, attempting to turn my private victory into a public execution. She wanted to shame me into submission. She wanted to apply so much social pressure that I would break down, apologize, and hand over the deeds and the money just to make the public nightmare stop. She honestly believed a viral video could undo an irrevocable family trust. The social media spectacle worked exactly as Alyssa intended when it came to our extended family. My phone screen became an endless waterfall of vitriolic text messages from aunts, uncles, and cousins I had not spoken to in years. My Aunt Susan texted me, calling me a disgrace to the family name and demanding I apologize to my parents. My cousin Mark left a vicious voicemail threatening to come to my office and force me to hand over the house keys to Jamal. They swallowed Alyssa's tearful performance without a single question. In their eyes, I was the rogue middle child who had finally lost her mind and declared war on her own flesh and blood. Then came the text message from my mother, Patricia. It was not a plea for peace or a demand for an apology. It was a cold, calculated legal threat. I read the glowing text on my screen and felt my blood run absolutely cold. "Claire, you have pushed this family too far," Patricia wrote. "If you do not sign that property over to Jamal by Friday afternoon, I am going to release your medical records to the court. I have a sworn statement from a private psychiatrist who is prepared to testify that you suffered a severe psychotic break 3 years ago. We will use this to prove you are mentally unstable and entirely unfit to manage Horizon Holdings LLC or any trust funds. We will have you declared legally incompetent and take conservatorship of your assets. Sign the deed or we take everything." I stared at the message, taking a slow, steady breath. My own mother was threatening to fabricate medical documents and commit outright perjury to steal my assets. She was willing to have me declared legally incompetent and strip away my basic human rights just to secure a real estate commission to pay off her son-in-law's illegal debts. The absolute depravity of her threat should have broken me. It should have sent me spiraling into a panic. Instead, it completely severed the very last microscopic thread of familial loyalty I had left. They were no longer misguided parents protecting a favored child. They were active criminals engaging in extortion and blackmail. I did not reply to my mother's extortion attempt. I did not shed a single tear over Alyssa's viral performance or the dozens of hateful messages flooding my inbox. Emotional reactions were exactly what they expected from the quiet, compliant artist they thought they knew. But I was not a quiet artist anymore. I was the managing director of a highly lucrative technology firm, and I had the resources of a Silicon Valley powerhouse at my disposal. I placed my phone face down on the kitchen counter and opened my laptop. I pulled up my secure email client and drafted an urgent priority message to the elite corporate legal team representing my newly acquired tech venture. I forwarded my mother's blackmail text and attached a link to Alyssa's defamatory video. I instructed my lead counsel to immediately file aggressive cease and desist orders and prepare a massive defamation lawsuit against both my sister and my parents. But I knew a simple lawsuit would not stop them. I needed to cut off the head of the snake. The entire reason this war started was Jamal's desperate need for cash to pay off dangerous private investors. A luxury real estate agent swimming in that kind of illicit debt does not keep clean books. Desperation always leaves a paper trail. I initiated a second email to a premier private forensic accounting firm my grandfather had used for years. I hired them on a massive retainer and gave them one specific objective. I wanted a complete, relentless forensic audit of Jamal's luxury real estate brokerage. I directed them to scrutinize every single escrow account, every wire transfer, and every property closing Jamal had touched over the last 3 years. If he was borrowing money from loan sharks and trying to steal my house to cover his tracks, there was absolute certainty he had already embezzled funds from his own clients. I closed my laptop and took a sip of my coffee, the dark roast tasting sweeter than usual. Alyssa thought she could win a war with fake tears and social media sympathy. My mother thought she could win with fabricated medical records and extortion. They fundamentally misunderstood the battlefield. I was not going to argue with them on the internet or beg for my extended family's approval. I was going to use my wealth to expose every single fraudulent action Jamal had ever committed, and I was going to let the federal authorities tear their perfect fake empire apart brick by brick. 72 hours later, my encrypted email pinged with a high-priority alert. The forensic accounting firm had not just found a paper trail, they had uncovered a massive, glaring financial sinkhole. My lead investigator, a former IRS auditor named David, requested an immediate secure video conference. I locked my office door and initiated the call. David did not bother with pleasantries. He shared his screen displaying a complex web of transaction logs and bank statements. He highlighted a specific recurring transfer that made my blood run instantly cold. For the entirety of our marriage, Bradley had been responsible for depositing our $4,000 monthly rent payment into the Horizon Holdings LLC corporate account. He always complained about the amount playing the role of the burdened provider perfectly. I had never meticulously cross-checked those specific incoming deposits against my broader corporate ledgers because the LLC managed multiple passive income streams, and I had foolishly trusted my own husband. David zoomed in on the routing numbers for the past 8 months. The payments had indeed been withdrawn from Bradley's primary checking account on the 1st of every month. But they never arrived at Horizon Holdings. Somewhere between Bradley hitting send and the money reaching my corporate portfolio, the funds had been seamlessly intercepted and diverted. $32,000 in pure liquid cash had vanished into a digital phantom account. Bradley had not just been living rent-free in a $1 million property, he had been actively stealing the rent money he claimed to be paying. I stared at the highlighted red text on David's screen, feeling a dangerous calm wash over me. This was not a simple accounting error. This was a deliberate, calculated theft executed month after month while Bradley smiled at me across the dinner table. But Bradley was not smart enough to set up a digital phantom account on his own. He needed an accomplice who understood real estate transactions and escrow routing. He needed someone desperate enough to risk everything for a quick cash injection. I instructed David to trace the exact destination of those diverted funds. It took his team less than an hour to pierce the veil of the shell account receiving the stolen rent. The routing numbers pointed directly to a commercial account registered under a subsidiary of Jamal's luxury real estate brokerage. Bradley and Jamal had actively conspired to forge deposit routing instructions. They had created fake electronic receipts to make it look like the rent was hitting my LLC, while quietly funneling every single dollar directly into Jamal's failing business ventures. But the rent interception was only the beginning of their criminal partnership. I remembered the $60,000 Bradley had frantically drained from our joint savings account the day before he ambushed me at the coffee shop. He had claimed he was securing funds for his high-asset divorce lawyer. That was another lie. David's forensic trace tracked that massive wire transfer right past Arthur Vance's law firm and straight into another one of Jamal's corporate accounts. The picture became terrifyingly clear. Jamal was drowning. He had been secretly pulling money from his clients' protected escrow accounts to finance his lavish lifestyle and keep his failing brokerage afloat. When the market shifted and clients started demanding their deposits, Jamal faced immediate exposure. He went to Bradley begging for a bailout. Bradley drained our joint savings and handed Jamal the $60,000 to replace the missing escrow funds before an audit could catch him. Bradley thought he was investing in his brother-in-law's loyalty. He thought funneling my rent money and our joint savings to Jamal would buy him the muscle he needed to evict me and force a quick sale of the house. They were two arrogant men playing a high-stakes game of financial hot potato with money that belonged entirely to me. I leaned back in my leather office chair, staring at the undeniable digital proof glowing on my monitor. The scope of their arrogance was staggering. Alyssa and my mother thought they could intimidate me with a fake psychiatric hold and a viral crying video. Bradley and Arthur Vance thought they could bully me in a coffee shop with empty threats of spousal support. They were all playing checkers while standing in the middle of a minefield. What Bradley and Jamal had done was not just grounds for a brutal divorce settlement. It was not a civil dispute over marital assets. Forging routing documents to intercept corporate payments was a federal offense. Draining joint accounts to cover stolen real estate escrow funds was professional suicide and a direct violation of state law. They had crossed the line from bad husbands and shady brokers straight into the realm of federal wire fraud and criminal embezzlement. I did not call Arthur Vance to negotiate. I did not text my mother to argue about her blackmail attempt. I methodically downloaded every single piece of forensic evidence David had compiled. I organized the fake deposit receipts, the routed bank transfers, the escrow shortages, and the $60,000 bailout into a pristine, heavily encrypted digital dossier. I opened a new secure email and attached the entire file. I addressed the first message directly to the Washington State Department of Licensing Real Estate Division. Jamal's broker license would be suspended before he even finished his morning coffee, and a state investigator would be knocking on his office door by noon. Then I opened a second email. I addressed this one to the Federal Bureau of Investigation Cybercrime and Financial Fraud Division in Seattle. I attached the forged routing documents and the proof of wire fraud across state banking lines. I hit send on both emails without a single ounce of hesitation. The trap was set and the jaws were about to snap shut. November swept into Seattle with an icy, bitter wind that stripped the autumn leaves from the trees and turned the sky a permanent slate gray. 6 weeks had passed since I initiated the federal and state investigations. 6 weeks of absolute deliberate silence on my end, while my adversaries mistook the quiet for surrender. They had no idea that federal investigators were currently combing through Jamal's digital ledgers or that the Department of Licensing had quietly frozen his brokerage's escrow accounts, pending a formal review. My family simply assumed I was cowering in my new loft, paralyzed by their threats, and frantically trying to find a way to appease them. Their sheer arrogance was truly their greatest vulnerability. On a brisk Tuesday afternoon, I walked down to my building's lobby to collect my mail. Mixed among the utility bills and corporate correspondence was a thick, oversized envelope made of heavy cream cardstock. I ran my fingers over the familiar gold foil return address. It was an invitation to my parents' annual Thanksgiving gala at their sprawling Mercer Island estate. My mother Patricia and my father Richard had hosted this extravagant catered affair every year since I was a child. It was essentially a performative showcase designed to impress their wealthy country club friends and parade their successful family before the Seattle elite. Opening the envelope, I found a rigidly formal invitation requesting my presence for cocktails and a sit-down dinner. The absolute audacity of sending me an embossed invitation to a family holiday gathering while simultaneously attempting to extort me for millions of dollars was staggering. They were treating me like a recalcitrant employee being summoned to a mandatory corporate disciplinary hearing disguised as a festive celebration. As I tossed the heavy cream envelope onto my kitchen counter, my phone vibrated violently against the granite surface. A new voicemail notification appeared on the screen. The caller ID displayed my father's name. Richard had not spoken to me directly in months, preferring to let my mother and Alyssa handle the emotional manipulation while he funded their legal attacks from the shadows. I tapped the screen and pressed the phone to my ear, listening as my father's cold, authoritative voice filled the quiet space of my loft. "Claire," he began, his tone stripped of any paternal warmth and dripping with corporate menace. "I expect you received the invitation to Thanksgiving dinner. Let me be absolutely clear about why you are attending. This family is done indulging your rebellious phase. You have caused enough financial damage to your sister's husband, and you have humiliated Bradley for the last time. We have prepared a comprehensive settlement agreement, and Arthur Vance will be bringing the documents to the house on Thanksgiving evening. You will arrive at 4 o'clock sharp. You will sign the deed of the Seattle property entirely over to Jamal to rectify his current liquidity issues. Furthermore, you will authorize a direct wire transfer of $500,000 to Bradley to cover his emotional distress and legal fees. If you follow these simple instructions, we will consider the matter closed and allow you to proceed with your divorce quietly." Richard paused, his breathing heavy, and measured through the phone speaker. He wanted the silence to build tension before he delivered the killing blow. "If you refuse to show up, or if you refuse to sign those documents, I will personally authorize the release of the medical dossier your mother compiled. We have sworn affidavits detailing your severe mental instability. I will not just submit them to the family court, Claire. I will overnight those files directly to the corporate board of the tech giant that just acquired your software. I will contact your new Silicon Valley partners and personally inform them that they have entrusted their brand and millions of dollars to a volatile, unstable sociopath. We will orchestrate a media campaign that will completely destroy your reputation as a CEO. Your corporate contracts include morality and stability clauses. When those executives see your psychiatric files, they will sever your licensing agreement and demand their money back. You will lose everything you built. Show up on Thursday and sign the papers. Do not test me." The voicemail clicked and ended. I lowered the phone from my ear. I stood alone in the absolute quiet of my kitchen, processing the magnitude of the felonies my father had just casually confessed to on a recorded line. He was attempting to leverage fabricated psychiatric evaluations to terrorize me into liquidating my private assets. He was threatening to intentionally torch my multi-million-dollar corporate acquisition out of pure spite if I did not pay off his favored son-in-law. Extortion, corporate blackmail, coercion. He had gift-wrapped the evidence of his criminal conspiracy and delivered it straight to my inbox. I did not scream or throw my phone against the wall. I did not dissolve into a puddle of tears, terrified of losing my new career. I slowly leaned back against the counter, and a wide, genuine smile spread across my face. This was exactly the consolidation of enemies I had been waiting for. Until now, they had been attacking me in isolated skirmishes. Alyssa fighting a proxy war on social media. Bradley and his sleazy lawyer ambushing me in coffee shops. My mother making threats via text message. But Richard's arrogant ultimatum had just changed the entire landscape of this conflict. By demanding that I surrender at their Thanksgiving table, he was gathering all my abusers into one single room. He was providing me with the perfect stage to execute the final devastating act of this war. They wanted a captive audience. They wanted to corner me surrounded by the elite guests they constantly tried to impress. They wanted to watch me break. I picked up my phone and opened a new text message addressed directly to my father. I did not write a long emotional paragraph defending my sanity or begging for mercy. I did not mention the federal investigations or the fact that I had already forwarded his voicemail to my corporate legal team. I typed a single definitive sentence: I will be there. I hit send and tossed the phone back onto the counter. In their sprawling Mercer Island mansion, they were undoubtedly celebrating that message. They were pouring expensive champagne and congratulating themselves on finally breaking my spirit. They mistakenly believed that the quiet, isolated artist had surrendered to the weight of their relentless pressure. They had no idea that I was not walking into their Thanksgiving trap as a victim. I was bringing a financial and legal hurricane right to their front door, and they were about to lose absolutely everything. Thanksgiving morning dawned crisp and clear over Seattle. While my mother was undoubtedly orchestrating her caterers and stressing over the perfection of her tablescape, I was standing at my kitchen island organizing a very different kind of feast. I was not baking a pie or preparing a polite hostess gift. I was assembling meticulously categorized dossiers. Each black leather binder contained the unassailable forensic proof of my family's staggering criminal hubris. At 9 o'clock sharp, my doorbell rang. I opened it to admit Special Agent Marcus Thorne, a lead investigator with the Washington State Department of Licensing Real Estate Division. He was a tall, imposing man with a grim expression that suggested he had seen every variation of real estate fraud the city had to offer. He did not bother sitting down. He stood in my living room flipping through the preliminary digital files I had forwarded him earlier in the week. His assessment was swift and merciless. "Your brother-in-law is not just sloppy," Thorne said, tapping a finger against the printed escrow logs. "He is clinically desperate. We cross-referenced the accounts you flagged. Jamal has been actively kiting funds from at least 4 different high-net-worth client escrow accounts to cover his personal debt markers. The $60,000 your husband wired him barely kept his head above water for a week. We already have enough evidence to revoke his broker's license permanently." Thorne looked up, his eyes locking onto mine. But given the interstate wire transfers and the forged corporate routing documents, this is no longer just a licensing issue. The FBI Cybercrime Division has officially opened a joint task force file. We are freezing Jamal's entire brokerage portfolio at midnight. I thanked Agent Thorne and handed him a physical copy of the finalized forensic audit David's team had completed the night before. The trap was fully constructed. Thorne slid the heavy binder into his briefcase, gave a curt nod, and let himself out of my loft. The first executioner was locked in position. At 11 o'clock, my second meeting arrived. Evelyn Vance was not related to Bradley's sleazy attorney Arthur Vance, but she enjoyed noting that she was about to end his career. Evelyn was a senior partner at a top-tier corporate litigation firm. She was ruthless, precise, and terrifyingly expensive. She walked into my loft, dropped her designer briefcase onto the granite counter, and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents marked with bright red signature flags. Evelyn had spent the last 48 hours drafting a preemptive strike so devastating that it would leave Bradley financially and legally decapitated. She spread the divorce petition across the island. "We are filing on the grounds of severe financial abuse and marital fraud," Evelyn stated, her voice devoid of any emotion. "I have attached the criminal referrals for the forged routing numbers and the joint account embezzlement directly into the divorce filing. When Arthur Vance opens this, He is going to realize his client is looking at 5 to 10 years in federal prison. But Evelyn was not just handling the divorce. I slid my father's blackmail voicemail across the table on a flash drive. She plugged it into her laptop and listened to Richard's threats with a terrifyingly blank expression. When the recording finished, she smiled a sharp, predatory grin. Extortion, coercion, and attempting to weaponize fabricated medical records to interfere with a corporate acquisition. She listed the charges like she was reading a menu. Your father handed us the rope to hang him. I have drafted immediate cease and desist orders for your parents and your sister. Furthermore, we are filing an emergency injunction to block the release of any medical documents, real or fabricated. If your father makes so much as a whisper to your Silicon Valley partners, we will hit him with a defamation suit that will liquidate his entire Mercer Island estate. I signed my name on every flagged line, feeling the weight of the last 5 years lifting off my shoulders with every stroke of the pen. Evelyn packed the signed documents back into her briefcase. She promised to have the servers standing by the moment I gave the signal. The legal guillotine was primed and ready to drop. With the meetings concluded and the trap fully armed, I turned my attention to the final preparation for the evening. For 31 years, I had attended these family gatherings wearing whatever muted, conservative outfit my mother deemed appropriate. I had always dressed to blend in, to be the quiet background character who absorbed the criticism and deflected the attention back to the golden children. I was done blending in. I walked into my bedroom and selected an outfit that commanded absolute authority. I put on a tailored emerald green Alexander McQueen blazer that fit like armor paired with razor-sharp black trousers and stiletto heels that echoed against the hardwood floor. I styled my hair in a sleek professional blowout and applied my makeup with meticulous precision. When I looked in the mirror, the compliant, disappointing middle child was entirely gone. Staring back at me was the managing director of Horizon Holdings, LLC, a multi-million-dollar technology executive who was about to dismantle her abusers with surgical precision. I grabbed my car keys and the sleek black briefcase containing my own copies of the dossiers. The drive across the floating bridge to Mercer Island was quiet and beautiful. The sun was beginning to set, casting a cold, golden light across the water. My phone remained silent. My family was waiting. I knew exactly what was happening inside that sprawling mansion right now. My mother would be directing the staff while Alyssa touched up her makeup and practiced her victim face. Bradley and Jamal would be drinking bourbon in my father's study, congratulating themselves on their clever little scheme. And Richard would be sitting at the head of the table, the mastermind who believed his Thanksgiving ultimatum had forced his rogue daughter back into line. They had invited aunts, uncles, and cousins, ensuring a full audience for my public surrender. They wanted everyone to watch me hand over the deed to my house and drain my bank accounts to save my reputation. They wanted to witness my complete humiliation. I pulled my car through the towering wrought iron gates of the estate and parked behind a line of luxury vehicles. I took one final, steadying breath, gripping the handle of my briefcase. They had asked for the quiet, compliant daughter to come and sign her life away. Instead, they were getting the CEO, and she was bringing hell with her. I stepped through the massive double doors of the Mercer Island estate, handing my wool coat to a bewildered staff member who was not used to seeing me arrive without a timid smile. The heavy bass of a jazz quartet echoed from the grand dining room, drawing me down the marble hallway. I paused at the arched threshold, taking in the grotesque spectacle before me. The room was dripping in ostentatious wealth. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over a massive mahogany table set for 30 of Seattle's most influential socialites. My extended family, aunts, uncles, and corporate sycophants were mingling with champagne flutes in hand. Right in the center of the room, holding court by the carved stone fireplace, was Bradley. He was not acting like a man on the brink of financial ruin. He was laughing loudly, his arm wrapped securely around the waist of a 20-something blonde I had never seen before. This must be Brittany, the infamous mistress he had apparently decided to upgrade to a public accessory. He was parading her through my family's home with absolute impunity. A few feet away, my sister Alyssa was practically glowing with manufactured triumph. She wore a stunning custom silk gown and a diamond necklace that caught the chandelier light with blinding intensity. I watched as she leaned intimately toward my Aunt Susan, swirling her champagne. Jamal is finalizing the paperwork on a 70-foot Sunseeker yacht this week. Alyssa bragged, her voice pitched deliberately loud enough for half the room to hear. We are planning to spend January cruising the Mediterranean. It is exhausting being married to such a relentless visionary, but the perks are simply undeniable. The delusion was staggering. Jamal was currently under federal investigation for embezzlement, and his wife was bragging about purchasing a luxury superyacht with phantom money. My entrance did not go unnoticed for long. The moment my heels clicked against the dining room's hardwood floor, heads began to turn. The ambient chatter slowly died down, replaced by the sharp intake of breath from several aunts, who immediately recognized that my emerald green Alexander McQueen suit was not the wardrobe of a defeated woman. Bradley's arrogant laugh caught in his throat as his eyes locked onto mine. He hastily dropped his arm from Brittany's waist, taking a subconscious step backward. Alyssa's smug smile froze, turning her features into a brittle mask. She clutched her diamond necklace as if suddenly terrified it might evaporate. But it was my father Richard who decided to break the mounting tension. He stood at the head of the long mahogany table, tapping a silver spoon against his crystal wineglass. The sharp, ringing sound cut through the remaining murmurs, and the jazz quartet abruptly stopped playing. Every eye in the cavernous room shifted from me to my father. He adjusted his tailored suit jacket and looked down at me with an expression of supreme patriarchal authority. "Claire," he announced, his voice projecting across the silent room like a gavel slamming against a judge's block. "You are late, but I am pleased you finally decided to see reason and join us." He gestured expansively toward an empty chair positioned at the absolute farthest end of the table, effectively a timeout corner for the family disappointment. "We have guests tonight, so we will handle this family business with efficiency and grace." My father pulled a thick manila envelope from the sideboard behind him and tossed it onto the center of the dining table. "Arthur Vance was kind enough to drop these off earlier. Before we sit down to give thanks, you are going to apologize to Bradley for your erratic behavior over the last 2 months. You will then sign the Seattle property deed over to Jamal immediately so he can proceed with his corporate investments without your unnecessary interference. And finally, you will sign the asset transfer documents resolving your divorce. Do this, Claire, and we can put your mental health episode behind us. Act like a proper family member, show some gratitude for this intervention, and you may take your seat." He crossed his arms, waiting for me to break down in tears and beg for the approval of the assembled guests. He honestly thought the presence of 30 wealthy onlookers would force me into submission out of pure social embarrassment. I did not move toward the empty chair. I did not drop my gaze to the floor. I walked slowly, deliberately down the length of the room until I was standing at the absolute opposite end of the mahogany table, facing my father directly. The silence in the room was absolute, a heavy, suffocating vacuum of anticipation. My mother, Patricia, stepped forward, her hands fluttering nervously against her silk dress. "Claire, please," she hissed, her voice tight with forced maternal concern. "Do not make a scene in front of our friends. Just sign the papers and sit down." I placed my sleek black leather briefcase onto the polished surface of the dining table. The heavy thud resonated like a gunshot. I snapped the metallic latches open one by one, the crisp clicks echoing off the vaulted ceiling. I looked at Bradley, who was now sweating visibly, his eyes darting between my briefcase and the exit. I looked at Alyssa, whose hand was trembling so badly she had to set her champagne glass down. Finally, I looked directly into my father's arrogant, uncompromising eyes. "I didn't come here to eat," I announced, my voice perfectly leveled, cool, and slicing through the tension like a razor blade. "I came to serve." I pulled the first thick dossier from my briefcase and let it drop onto the table. The embossed seal of my corporate litigation firm was clearly visible on the cover. My father's confident posture faltered slightly, a microscopic twitch in his jaw, signaling the first genuine wave of uncertainty. "What is this nonsense?" Richard demanded, taking a step forward. "I told you I will not tolerate any more of your games. You are not holding the cards anymore, Dad," I replied, maintaining my intense eye contact. "The documents Arthur Vance brought you are completely worthless. You see, while you were busy planning this little public execution, I was busy dismantling your entire empire." I turned my attention away from my father's paling face and locked my gaze onto the man who had promised to love and protect me. Bradley was already shrinking back against the carved stone fireplace, his previous bravado evaporating into the heavy air of the dining room. I reached into my sleek leather briefcase and pulled out the first heavy black binder. I did not toss it playfully. I walked the entire length of the grand mahogany table, the sharp, methodical clicks of my stiletto heels acting as a countdown timer for his impending doom. I slammed the heavy binder directly onto the polished wood right in front of him. "I suggest you open that, Bradley," I instructed, my voice echoing off the crystal chandeliers and silencing the last few gasps from the extended family. "Arthur Vance might have confidently told you that you were legally entitled to half of my corporate assets, but Arthur Vance is an incompetent idiot who failed to check the legal standing of our original prenuptial agreement against my grandfather's trust stipulations." Bradley's trembling hands fumbled awkwardly with the cover of the binder. He flipped it open, revealing the crisp legal documents inside. "That is a finalized divorce decree," I announced, ensuring every single guest in the crowded room could hear me clearly. "Signed, stamped, and expedited by a superior court judge yesterday afternoon. You are officially an unmarried man." My highly aggressive corporate legal team filed it under the grounds of severe financial abuse and marital fraud, which entirely nullifies any ridiculous claim you thought you had to my estate, my technology firm, or the Horizon Holdings accounts. You get absolutely zero assets, not a single penny of alimony, no settlement, no house. You walk away with exactly what you brought into this marriage, which is absolutely nothing. Bradley stared at the signed judicial order, his face draining of all color. He looked exactly like a man who had just stepped off a cliff and was waiting to hit the ground. But Arthur said, he stammered, his voice cracking pitifully. "Arthur lied to you to secure his expensive retainer," I replied smoothly. "A retainer you paid using stolen money." I shifted my focus to the young blonde woman standing frozen beside him. Brittany had spent the entire evening clinging to Bradley's arm like he was a winning lottery ticket, parading around my family's home as if she had already inherited my life. Now she looked absolutely terrified, like a deer caught in the blinding headlights of an oncoming train. "You must be Brittany," I said, offering her a cold, razor-sharp smile. "I imagine Bradley spun a very convincing and romantic fairy tale for you. He probably told you he was a highly successful, wealthy corporate executive trapped in a loveless marriage with a crazy, volatile wife. He probably promised you luxury vacations, designer clothes, and a very comfortable life once he secured his massive multi-million-dollar divorce settlement." Brittany swallowed hard, her eyes darting nervously between me and the silent crowd of wealthy onlookers who were now watching her humiliation unfold. "Well, Brittany, you should know exactly what kind of prize you just won." I continued, stepping closer to her until I could smell her expensive perfume. "You think you stole a wealthy executive. The truth is, you attached yourself to a desperate financial parasite. Did he tell you about the $60,000 he frantically drained from our joint savings account last week?" Brittany nodded slightly, her eyes wide, clearly believing that money was meant for their new glamorous life together. "He did not keep it," I stated bluntly, completely shattering her illusion. "He handed every single cent of that money over to my brother-in-law, Jamal, to cover up illicit, illegal real estate debts. He completely bankrupted himself trying to buy his way into a criminal conspiracy that has already collapsed." Brittany gasped, stepping away from Bradley as if he were suddenly contagious. "But he said we were buying a luxury condo downtown," she whispered, her voice trembling with rising panic. "With what money?" I challenged, my voice echoing in the quiet room. "I have completely frozen every account his name was ever attached to." His personal credit cards are entirely maxed out from trying to keep up the fake appearance of wealth to impress you. He does not even own the luxury car he drove you here in tonight. It is a corporate lease under my company's name, and I had the keys remotely deactivated 10 minutes ago. Furthermore, since he no longer has access to my rental properties or my bank accounts, he cannot pay the rent on that temporary luxury apartment he leased to impress you. He is facing eviction tomorrow morning. Brittany stared at Bradley in absolute unadulterated horror, the blood completely rushing from her face. She looked at the man she thought was her golden ticket and saw nothing but a rapidly sinking ship. "Bradley, tell her she is lying," Brittany demanded, her voice shrill and echoing in the dead-silent dining room. "Tell her you have the money for the condo. Tell her you are rich." Bradley opened his mouth, but only a pathetic stuttering sound emerged. He looked wildly around the room, searching for an ally, searching for Arthur Vance, searching for anyone to save him from this brutal public execution. "He is crazy, Brittany," he finally choked out, sweating profusely and tugging at his collar. "She is making all of this up to humiliate us. She is mentally unstable." I did not argue with his pathetic lies. I simply reached back into my briefcase and pulled out a second thick folder. I extracted the certified forensic bank statements and dropped them onto the table right on top of his finalized divorce decree. "I suggest you read those, Brittany," I offered, calmly gesturing to the papers. "They detail exactly where the $60,000 went. They show his maxed-out credit limits, his denied loan applications, and his absolute zero balances. Read them and decide if you want to spend the rest of your life dodging angry creditors and paying off a fraudster's massive legal bills." Brittany snatched the papers from the mahogany table. Her eyes scanned the red negative numbers, the suspicious routing transfers, the undeniable, irrefutable proof of his complete financial ruin. Her breathing hitched as the crushing reality crashed down on her. She had thrown away her own life, her reputation, and her dignity for a man who was about to be homeless and potentially incarcerated. "You lied to me," she shrieked, turning on Bradley with venomous, unhinged fury. "You told me you were rich. You told me you were taking care of everything, you broke loser." Bradley reached for her, his hands shaking uncontrollably. "Baby, please let me explain. I can fix this. I just need time. Do not touch me," she screamed, slapping his hands away with violent force. She took a step back, her hands trembling so violently that the expensive crystal wine glass she was holding slipped from her grip. It hit the hardwood floor, shattering into 100 glittering pieces. The sharp crash made several aunts and uncles jump, but nobody dared to say a single word. Brittany did not look back. She turned on her heel and stormed out of the grand dining room, her furious footsteps echoing down the marble hallway until the heavy front doors slammed shut. Bradley watched her go, his entire body sagging as if his spine had been removed. The arrogant man who had ambushed me in a coffee shop, the man who had conspired to steal my home and my wealth, was entirely gone. His legs gave out and he collapsed heavily into the nearest dining chair, burying his face in his trembling hands. He was utterly, completely ruined. The sound of Bradley's pathetic hyperventilating was the only noise in the dining room for exactly 10 seconds. Then Jamal slammed his hands onto the mahogany table, rattling the fine china. He pushed himself up, his expensive silk suit suddenly looking tight across his shoulders. "You think you are so incredibly smart, Claire?" He sneered, his voice booming with forced bravado. "You think you can waltz in here with some fancy folder and scare us?" He pointed a thick finger at Bradley's slumping form. "Bradley is an idiot who let his wife outmaneuver him with a boilerplate prenup. I am not Bradley. You do not have a single thing on me." Jamal rounded the table, his heavy footsteps closing the distance between us. He was a large man used to using his physical presence to intimidate clients into signing terrible deals. He stopped just inches from my face, attempting to loom over me. "You are bluffing," he growled, his breath smelling faintly of expensive scotch and raw panic. "You are trying to cause a scene to ruin Alyssa's holiday because you are jealous of our success. You have always been jealous of us." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I looked up at him, maintaining a perfectly serene expression. "Jamal," I said softly, "you really should have paid closer attention to the $60,000 Bradley wired you last week. It left a very clear digital footprint straight into your escrow accounts." Jamal's eyes widened fractionally. He raised his hand as if to grab my shoulder. "You shut your mouth!" he yelled, spit flying from his lips. "You do not know anything about my business. You are a glorified computer geek playing CEO. You have absolutely nothing." I smiled and tapped the second black binder resting in my briefcase. "Oh, Jamal, I have everything. And I brought a friend to help me explain it to you." I turned my head slightly and gave a sharp nod toward the grand entryway. The heavy oak front doors swung open, and the heavy tread of tactical boots echoed against the marble floor. Special Agent Marcus Thorne walked into the dining room, flanked by two uniformed state troopers. My mother let out a strangled shriek, clutching my father's arm. My father's face went from pale to a dangerous mottled red. Thorne bypassed them entirely, his steely gaze locked squarely on Jamal. He marched straight up to the dining table, pulling a thick manila envelope from his jacket. Jamal Vance Thorne said, his voice echoing with absolute governmental authority. "I am Special Agent Thorne with the Washington State Department of Licensing Real Estate Division. You have been served." Thorne slapped the envelope hard against Jamal's chest, forcing him to take it or let it drop. Jamal stumbled back, his hands automatically closing around the thick packet. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice losing all its previous boom and reducing to a reedy squeak. "That is the official notice of your immediate and permanent license revocation," Thorne stated clearly, making sure every guest in the room could hear the charges. "We have executed a complete forensic audit of your brokerage. We found the fraudulent property listings you used to inflate your portfolio. We tracked the phantom buyers. But more importantly, we traced the massive black hole in your client escrow accounts." Jamal staggered, as if he had been physically struck. Thorne did not offer an ounce of pity. "You have been actively embezzling client funds to cover your personal debt markers for the last 14 months, Thorne continued relentlessly. "You took the $60,000 from Bradley and illegally diverted it to cover a missing down payment for another client. You are done selling real estate in this state or any other." Alyssa slammed her hands on the table, sending her champagne glass toppling over. The expensive liquid soaked into my mother's pristine lace tablecloth. "You are lying!" Alyssa screamed, her voice shrill and echoing with frantic desperation. She marched around the table, stepping in front of her husband like a shield. "We are wealthy. We are incredibly rich. Jamal is buying me a 70-foot yacht this week. We do not need some stupid real estate license. We have millions in private investments." I looked at my sister, taking in her custom silk gown and the glittering jewels around her neck. The sheer depth of her denial was almost tragic. "Alyssa," I said, my voice dropping to a low conversational tone that somehow commanded more attention than her screaming. "Your diamonds are leased. The rental company has been calling Jamal's office for 3 days trying to collect the overdue premium." Alyssa instinctively reached up to clutch the stones at her throat, her eyes wide with shock. "As for your massive wealth," I continued, relentlessly turning my gaze back to Jamal. "Agent Thorne here did not just revoke a license. He brought the federal government with him. Jamal's personal and business bank accounts were entirely frozen this morning by federal authorities. He is currently under a joint task force investigation for felony wire fraud. Your phantom 70-foot yacht is not coming, Alyssa. The deposit he supposedly put down was just another forged document. In fact, the FBI has already filed the seizure paperwork for your Mercer Island penthouse. They will be seizing your cars by Monday morning at the absolute latest. You have $0. You are entirely bankrupt." Alyssa stared at me, her mouth opening and closing without making a sound. She looked at Jamal, begging him to deny it, begging him to call me a liar. Jamal simply stared at the floor, his shoulders shaking. The reality finally shattered her perfectly constructed delusion. Alyssa let out a guttural, devastating wail. She sank to her knees right there in the dining room, tearing at her perfectly styled hair and bursting into loud hysterical tears as the life she had faked completely dissolved around her. The sound of Alyssa weeping uncontrollably echoed off the vaulted ceilings, filling the silence left by the stunned guests. For a moment, nobody moved. Then my mother snapped out of her paralyzed shock. She rushed around the mahogany table, the heels of her expensive shoes clicking sharply against the floor, and dropped to her knees beside her golden child. Patricia wrapped her arms protectively around Alyssa's shaking shoulders, shielding her from the stares of our aunts, uncles, and their high society friends. My father remained standing at the head of the table, but his previous posture of absolute authority had completely collapsed. Richard was visibly shaking his face devoid of color, his knuckles white where his hands gripped the edges of the dining table. The grand orchestrator of this Thanksgiving trap was entirely speechless, watching his carefully curated empire burn to ashes in front of a live audience. Patricia looked up from Alyssa, her eyes flashing with a raw, unhinged hatred I had never fully seen unmasked before. Her face contorted, dropping the elegant, polished mask she wore for the country club set. "You are a monster!" Patricia screamed, her voice tearing through the room with startling ferocity. "Look at what you have done to your sister. Look at what you have done to this family. You come into my house on Thanksgiving and destroy everything out of pure spite and jealousy. You have always been a vicious, ungrateful child, and now you have ruined us." Agent Thorne and the two state troopers remained perfectly still, unfazed by the melodramatic outburst. Jamal was sweating profusely, backing away from the table as Thorne handed him the rest of the federal documentation. My mother pulled Alyssa tighter, rocking her back and forth while glaring daggers at me. "We gave you everything," Patricia continued, her voice cracking with manufactured hysteria. "We brought you into this family business. We tolerated your eccentricities. We tried to help you when your marriage fell apart, and this is how you repay us. By attacking your sister's husband with lies and fabricated government documents. You are sick, Claire. You need psychiatric help, and I will personally see that you are locked away before you can do any more damage to the people who actually belong in this family." I watched my mother desperately trying to maintain her narrative of the tragic, victimized family under attack by the unstable daughter. It was the same script she had used my entire life, but the audience was no longer buying it. I walked slowly down the side of the long table, ignoring the horrified stares of my cousins and the rigid silence of my uncles. I stopped directly in front of my father, who was now sweating through his expensive tailored suit. I turned my icy gaze down to my mother, who was still kneeling on the hardwood floor. "You did not protect Jamal because he was a good son-in-law." "Mom," I said, my voice dropping to a conversational tone that carried effortlessly through the dead silent room. "You did not orchestrate this massive blackmail campaign against me because you care about family loyalty or because you think Alyssa's marriage is sacred. You protected him because you are completely bankrupt." My father flinched as if I had struck him across the face. Patricia's mouth snapped shut, the hysterical tears drying up instantly. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the final dossier, dropping it onto the table directly in front of Richard. "Let us tell everyone the real truth about the great Richard and Patricia Fortune," I announced, looking around at the assembled guests. 2 years ago, Jamal convinced you to liquidate your entire retirement fund to back a private commercial real estate venture. But he never invested that money. He funneled every single cent of your life savings into a massive Ponzi scheme to cover his own failing investments. He lost all of it. Your accounts are entirely empty. You are drowning in debt, and you were absolutely desperate for him to steal my Seattle property, just so he could secure enough liquid cash to pay you back before your country club friends found out you were secretly destitute. You were willing to completely destroy your own daughter, forge medical records, and torch my corporate career just to hide the fact that your favorite son-in-law robbed you blind. A collective gasp rippled through the grand dining room. The heavy silence shattered instantly, replaced by a wave of furious, disgusted whispering from the extended family. Uncle Thomas, who had invested heavily in my father's previous business ventures, stood up from his chair, his face dark with betrayal. Aunt Susan backed away from the table, staring at my mother as if she were a stranger. The polished, immaculate facade of the wealthy, perfect parents dissolved into dust right before their eyes. They were no longer the elite patriarch and matriarch of the family. I had exposed them as broke, enabling frauds who were willing to cannibalize their own child to maintain an illusion. Richard opened his mouth to defend himself, to spin one of his legendary corporate lies, but nothing came out. He looked at the thick dossier on the table, knowing it contained the undeniable forensic proof of his ruined finances. His face turned an alarming shade of gray, and he suddenly clutched his chest, his fingers gripping the fabric of his shirt. He staggered backward, hitting the edge of his leather armchair and collapsing into it heavily. He was breathing in short, shallow gasps, unable to deny a single word I had spoken. Patricia looked frantically around the room, searching for a sympathetic face, but found only judgment and contempt. Her wealthy friends were already gathering their coats, slipping quietly toward the front door to avoid the fallout of this spectacular social ruin. My family had spent my entire life trying to make me feel small, insignificant, and crazy so they could prop up their own fragile egos. They had built an empire on lies, manipulation, and stolen money. Now the truth was out in the open and their empire was entirely gone. I picked up my empty briefcase, clicked the latches shut, and walked toward the exit, leaving them to choke on the ashes of their own greed. I paused at the threshold of the grand dining room, turning back for one last look at the absolute devastation I had wrought. The scene was a masterpiece of shattered illusions. My mother knelt on the hardwood floor, her designer dress soaking up spilled champagne, desperately clutching her sobbing golden child. Alyssa was practically hyperventilating, her hands frantically gripping the least diamonds at her throat, as if holding them tight enough could magically pay off her husband's federal wire fraud charges. Jamal remained pinned under the unyielding stare of Special Agent Thorne, a bloated, deflated man finally realizing his country club days were being permanently replaced by federal prison time. Bradley sat paralyzed in his chair, staring at the signed divorce decree that confirmed his transition from arrogant executive to penniless vagrant. He looked like an empty shell stripped of the stolen money and fake prestige he had used to lure his now absent mistress. My father, Richard, was slumped dangerously deep in his leather armchair, clutching his chest, while his wealthy friends and business partners fled the house in droves, actively avoiding his gaze. The silence from my extended family was absolute. My aunts, uncles, and cousins, who had spent decades enabling my parents' toxic behavior, now stood in stunned, horrified silence. They finally saw the putrid, rotting core beneath the Mercer Island mansion, the luxury cars, the designer clothes, and the catered galas. I stood perfectly straight, my tailored emerald suit feeling like impenetrable armor. For the first time in 31 years, the heavy, suffocating weight of their expectations and their constant belittling judgments was completely gone. I was not the scapegoat anymore. I was the architect of their reckoning. I let the heavy silence stretch, ensuring every single person in the room was listening before I spoke. My voice was calm, carrying a lethal clarity that demanded absolute attention. You called me a disappointment. You called me a failure. For my entire life, you made me the punchline of every family joke I began, my gaze sweeping over my parents and siblings. You mocked my career choices. You undermined my ambition. You orchestrated public humiliations disguised as holiday celebrations, and you demanded my unwavering gratitude for the privilege of being your designated punching bag. I looked directly at my father, who could barely lift his head to meet my eyes. You thought you could use fabricated psychiatric records to extort me because you assumed I was weak. You assumed I would instantly fold under the pressure of your threats, just like I did when I was a terrified child. But you profoundly underestimated me. I am the only one in this room who actually built something real. I built a multi-million-dollar technology company with my own hands, my own intellect, and my own relentless hard work. I did not rely on stolen escrow funds or massive Ponzi schemes to fund a fake lifestyle. My success is completely authentic. Yours is a criminal mirage that just evaporated. I shifted my attention to Alyssa and Jamal. You wanted my money to fuel your delusions of grandeur. Instead, you are getting federal indictments, public disgrace, and complete asset forfeiture. I turned my sharp gaze to Bradley. You wanted an easy payout to fund your pathetic infidelity. Instead, you get absolute poverty and a ruined reputation. My mother tried to speak, her mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish, but no sound emerged. She simply clutched her ruined silk dress and wept. I did not feel a single drop of pity for any of them. The empathy they had spent years trying to exploit was completely gone, replaced by cold, unyielding justice that they themselves had forged. I leave you to the miserable, bankrupt reality you created for yourselves, I stated, delivering the final undeniable blow. I turned my back on the grand dining room, ending my participation in their toxic theater forever. I did not wait for a response. I did not pause to gauge their reactions or bask in their ruined expressions. The sharp sound of my stiletto heels striking the marble hallway was the only rhythm guiding my exit. I walked out the massive front doors of the Mercer Island estate, stepping out into the crisp November night. The bitter winter wind swept over me immediately, carrying away the suffocating, oppressive atmosphere of the mansion. Behind me, the silence in the dining room was utterly deafening. It was a heavy, heavy quiet broken only by the pathetic, undeniable sounds of their shattered reality. I could hear Alyssa's ragged, hysterical sobbing echoing through the open archways, mixing with Bradley's rapid, panicked breathing as he hyperventilated into his hands. I heard the sharp, authoritative tone of Agent Thorne instructing Jamal to stand up and place his hands behind his back. The empire of lies was officially being dismantled piece by piece right there in the dining room. I walked down the sweeping cobblestone driveway toward my car, breathing in the cold, fresh air. The heavy burden I had carried for 3 decades, the desperate need for their approval, the fear of their judgment, the constant anxiety of never being enough was entirely gone. I unlocked my car and slid into the driver's seat, placing my empty leather briefcase on the passenger side. I started the engine, the quiet hum of the motor, a soothing contrast to the chaos I had left inside. As I drove back across the floating bridge toward Seattle, I did not look back in the rearview mirror. I did not need to. My past was a burning wreckage behind me, and my future bright, secure, and untethered from their toxic grasp was finally entirely my own. 2 weeks passed since the Thanksgiving massacre. The silence from my family was absolute, replaced entirely by the frantic scrambling of their respective defense attorneys. My focus, however, remained on tying up the final loose end occupying my Seattle property. Bradley had stubbornly refused to vacate my house. Despite the finalized divorce decree and the clear legal mandate explicitly stripping him of any right to the residence, he decided to barricade himself inside. He ignored the initial notices, ignoring the certified letters from my legal team, and foolishly assuming I would engage in a drawn-out emotional negotiation. He texted me incessantly, begging for a second chance, pleading for a financial compromise, and threatening to destroy my belongings if I forced him out. I did not respond to a single message. I did not waste my breath arguing with a man who had already lost. I simply let the legal system handle the pest removal. On a crisp Tuesday morning, exactly 14 days after the dinner, I sat parked in my idling SUV at the end of my street. I watched as 3 marked vehicles from the King County Sheriff's Department pulled into my driveway. I had filed an expedited writ of restitution backed by the undeniable proof of his financial abuse and threats. The deputies did not knock politely. They pounded on the heavy oak door, their voices booming with absolute authority, demanding immediate entry. When Bradley refused to open the door, clinging to his pathetic delusion of control, they bypassed the pleasantries entirely. The heavy thud of a battering ram shattered the morning quiet. The front door splintered open and 5 heavily armed deputies surged into the house. Bradley had spent his entire life coasting on false bravado and unearned privilege. Facing actual armed law enforcement, his arrogant facade crumbled instantly. I watched through the windshield as the deputies cleared the first floor. their tactical gear a stark contrast to the pristine, modern decor of my living room. Bradley tried to put up a fight, shouting about his marital rights and demanding to call Arthur Vance. He was screaming that it was his house, that he paid the mortgage, that I was a crazy ex-wife trying to frame him. The deputies completely ignored his frantic lies. They informed him that his name was nowhere on the deed and that he was officially trespassing on private property. When he aggressively shoved one of the officers in a desperate attempt to run back upstairs, they took him down hard. Less than 10 minutes after the door was breached, Bradley was forcibly frog-marched out the front door. His hands were zip-tied securely behind his back. He was wearing stained sweatpants and a wrinkled t-shirt, completely stripped of his usual expensive corporate armor. Two deputies dragged him roughly down the front steps, while a third tossed exactly 2 heavy black trash bags onto the damp morning grass. Those bags contained the absolute entirety of his worldly possessions. Everything else he had enjoyed, the luxury watches, the designer shoes, the expensive electronics, had been meticulously catalogued and legally reclaimed as my sole corporate assets. He owned nothing but the dirty clothes on his back. The commotion had drawn a significant audience. The wealthy, meticulously manicured neighbors of my exclusive subdivision had stepped out onto their porches or paused their morning jogs to witness the spectacle. Bradley twisted wildly in the deputy's grip, his face a mask of purple rage and utter humiliation. He looked wildly at the assembled crowd, searching for a friendly face, searching for anyone to validate his victimhood. Instead, he saw only judgmental stares and shaking heads. They saw exactly what he was: a common squatter, being forcibly removed from a home he tried to steal. One of the deputies shoved him toward the back of a waiting squad car. He stumbled, his bare feet slipping on the wet pavement. He caught sight of my SUV parked at the end of the street. Our eyes locked through the windshield. There was no defiance left in him. He looked utterly broken, a pathetic parasite finally scraped off its host. The deputy shoved his head down and forced him into the back seat, slamming the heavy door shut and trapping him in the cramped cage. The 2 trash bags of his pathetic belongings were tossed unceremoniously into the trunk. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated his tear-streaked face as the cruiser pulled away, carrying him toward the county jail for assaulting an officer. While Bradley was experiencing his very public eviction, an equally devastating reckoning was unfolding across town. Jamal Vance thought he could outrun the federal government by frantically shredding documents and attempting to move whatever liquid assets he had left into offshore accounts. He severely underestimated the speed and efficiency of Special Agent Thorne's task force. Precisely as Bradley was being shoved into a squad car, federal agents swarmed Jamal's luxury real estate office downtown. They did not wait for him to finish his morning espresso. A dozen agents wearing tactical vests emblazoned with FBI raided the sleek, glass-walled suite. They seized every computer, froze the servers, and boxed up every single paper file in the building. Jamal was caught completely off guard, attempting to slip out the back service elevator. They tackled him to the polished concrete floor, slapping heavy steel cuffs on his wrists. His arrest was not a quiet, discreet affair. A local news crew, tipped off by a very helpful anonymous source, was waiting right outside the main lobby doors. As Jamal was paraded out of the high-rise office building, camera flashes erupted like strobe lights. The news anchor shoved a microphone in his face, loudly asking for a comment on the multi-million-dollar embezzlement charges and the revocation of his broker license. Jamal kept his head down, using his suit jacket to shield his face, but the damage was already permanently done. The midday broadcast led with the spectacular downfall of the city's self-proclaimed luxury realtor. The news anchor detailed the staggering scope of his fraud, the frozen accounts, the fake listings, and the devastating betrayal of his own in-laws' retirement funds. They displayed his mugshot, a stark, unflattering image of a ruined man staring blankly into the camera. Alyssa's face was conspicuously absent from the coverage, her fake high society life entirely decimated by her husband's greed. By sunset, the entire city knew that Jamal Vance was nothing but a predatory criminal. My sister was now married to an indicted felon facing decades in federal prison. My parents were completely bankrupt, their golden child exposed as a fraud, and their social standing pulverized beyond repair. Bradley was sitting in a holding cell, his entire existence reduced to 2 trash bags of dirty laundry. I sat on the pristine white sofa in my quiet, fully secured home, sipping a glass of expensive red wine. The storm had finally passed. The toxic weeds had been completely pulled from the roots. I had not just survived their betrayal, I had orchestrated their absolute destruction. 1 month later, the dust had settled over the ruins of my family's fabricated empire, revealing the ugly, decaying foundation beneath it all. The immediate fallout of the Thanksgiving massacre was swift and entirely unmerciful. Patricia and Richard were facing complete financial annihilation. Without the illicit funds Jamal had been siphoning into their accounts to keep their Ponzi scheme afloat, their massive mountain of debt crushed them under its own weight. The bank aggressively moved to foreclose on the Mercer Island estate, leaving my parents frantically scrambling to put the mansion on the market before the asset could be officially seized by the federal government. They desperately tried to maintain their facade of old money elegance, attempting to host private showings for their remaining elite acquaintances. But the stench of sheer desperation is impossible to cover up with expensive perfume. For years, Jamal had been their personal financial wizard, artificially inflating their property values on paper using phantom buyers and fraudulent escrow accounts to make them look like invincible real estate moguls. Without his illegal market manipulation, the mansion was suddenly subjected to a harsh, legitimate appraisal. It was a sprawling, outdated relic that required millions in structural repairs. My parents were forced to list it at a fraction of what they claimed it was worth. When it finally sold, it was bought by an overseas developer for a devastating, massive loss. The payout barely covered a third of their outstanding debt markers to the banks. The humiliating sale forced Patricia and Richard out of their prestigious zip code and into a cramped, damp 2-bedroom rental on the far industrial outskirts of the city. The country club immediately revoked their membership, citing unpaid dues and the unacceptable public scandal of Jamal's very televised federal indictment. They had gone from hosting catered galas to calculating whether they could afford generic brand groceries. Their entire legacy was wiped out. Alyssa was enduring a spectacular freefall of her own. Her grand delusion of sailing the Mediterranean on a 70-foot yacht had been violently traded for the crushing reality of a 300-square-foot studio apartment located directly above a noisy 24-hour laundromat. With Jamal's assets entirely frozen by the FBI and his firm completely liquidated to pay back the clients he defrauded, my sister was left with absolutely nothing. The leased diamonds, the designer silk gowns, the luxury cars, they had all been ruthlessly repossessed by aggressive collection agencies within days of Jamal's very public arrest. Left without a single marketable skill or a shred of professional experience, Alyssa was forced into the harsh realities of the working class she had spent her entire life mocking. She secured a minimum-wage retail job, folding clearance sweaters at a discount department store in a dying strip mall. The irony of her new uniform was pure poetic justice. She wore a cheap polyester vest and a plastic name tag standing on her blistered feet for 10-hour shifts, while dealing with rude, aggressive bargain hunters. She tried desperately to cling to her former status, reaching out to the wealthy high society friends she used to entertain. She invited them to coffee, hoping to secure loans or solicit pity. But the Thanksgiving exposure had been absolute and entirely fatal to her social standing. The socialites who had once air-kissed her cheeks and praised her fake wealth now actively crossed the street to avoid her. They blocked her number and instructed their doormen to turn her away if she ever showed up at their penthouses. Alyssa was a confirmed social pariah, a toxic radioactive reminder of a massive fraud scandal. Her entire identity had been wrapped tightly in the illusion of limitless wealth, and without it, she was entirely invisible. She spent her evenings riding the crowded public bus back to her tiny apartment, utterly abandoned by everyone she thought mattered. The grinding desperation eventually led them straight back to the one person they had spent their entire lives trying to destroy. My phone began to ring. At first, the voicemails were tentative attempts at reconciliation, testing the waters of my newfound corporate success with fake politeness. Then, as their financial reality grew more suffocating, the messages escalated into pathetic groveling pleas for mercy. My mother left tearful voicemails talking about the sacred bond of family loyalty and begging for just a small loan to keep them afloat for the winter. Richard left rambling, disjointed messages citing his failing health and asking me to buy out a tiny stake in his non-existent shell company. Alyssa even called sobbing hysterically into the receiver, asking if I could hire her as a high-paid consultant at my technology firm because the retail job was ruining her feet and her sanity. They threw away their remaining pride, offering empty, hollow apologies they did not mean simply because they viewed me as their last remaining ATM. I did not engage. I did not text them back. I did not answer a single incoming call. I sat at my sleek glass desk in my downtown corner office, watching the notification icon pop up on my phone screen. I pressed the play button on my mother's latest hysterical voicemail. Her voice trembled through the speaker, whining about how cold their new rental apartment was and how she just needed $50,000 to get back on her feet. I listened for exactly 4 seconds, letting the sheer desperation of her voice wash over me. Then I pressed delete. I did the exact same thing with Richard. I did the same with Alyssa. I dragged their entire contact profiles into the blocked folder, permanently erasing their ability to reach me or infect my life ever again. The severance was absolute. They were no longer my family. They were just strangers dealing with the natural, brutal consequences of their own actions. I turned my attention back to the glowing monitors of my thriving company, the silence in my office a beautiful testament to the peace I had finally secured. Fast forward exactly 2 weeks from the night I walked out of the Mercer Island mansion. The silence from my family was absolute, but the noise from my soon-to-be ex-husband was deafening. Despite the signed divorce decree and the explicit legal mandate legally stripping him of any right to my property, Bradley had foolishly decided to barricade himself inside my Seattle home. He ignored the formal notices, ignored the certified letters from my legal team, and arrogantly assumed I would engage in a drawn-out emotional negotiation. He texted me incessantly, alternating between begging for a second chance, demanding a financial compromise, and threatening to destroy my personal belongings if I forced him out. I did not respond to a single message. I did not waste my breath arguing with a man who had already lost everything. I simply let the legal system handle the pest removal. On a crisp Tuesday morning, I sat parked in my idling SUV at the end of my street, watching the inevitable consequences of his arrogance unfold. 3 marked vehicles from the King County Sheriff Department pulled into my driveway. I had filed an expedited writ of restitution backed by undeniable proof of his financial abuse and threats. The deputies did not knock politely or ask for his cooperation. They pounded on the heavy oak door, their voices booming with absolute authority, demanding immediate entry. When Bradley refused to open the door, clinging to his pathetic delusion of control, they bypassed the pleasantries entirely. The heavy, unmistakable thud of a battering ram shattered the morning quiet. The front door splintered open, and 5 heavily armed deputies surged into the house. Bradley had spent his entire life coasting on false bravado and unearned privilege, assuming his status would always protect him. Facing actual armed law enforcement, his corporate armor crumbled instantly. I watched through the windshield as the deputies cleared the first floor. Their tactical gear, a stark contrast to the pristine modern decor of my living room. I knew exactly how Bradley would react. He would try to talk his way out of it, lying and manipulating just like he always did, but the badge-wearing officers were immune to his charms. Less than 10 minutes after the door was breached, Bradley was forcibly marched out the front entrance. His hands were securely zip-tied behind his back. He was wearing stained sweatpants and a wrinkled undershirt, completely stripped of his usual expensive tailored suits. 2 deputies dragged him roughly down the front steps, while a third officer tossed exactly 2 heavy black trash bags onto the damp morning grass. Those bags contained the absolute entirety of his worldly possessions. Everything else, the luxury watches, the designer shoes, the expensive electronics, had been meticulously catalogued and legally reclaimed as my sole corporate assets. He owned nothing but the dirty clothes on his back. The loud commotion had drawn a significant audience. The wealthy, meticulously manicured neighbors of my exclusive subdivision had stepped out onto their porches or paused their morning jogs to witness the spectacle. Bradley twisted wildly in the deputy's grip, his face a mask of purple rage and utter humiliation. He looked frantically at the assembled crowd, searching for a friendly face, searching for anyone to validate his victimhood and defend his honor. Instead, he saw only judgmental stares and shaking heads. They saw exactly what he was: a common squatter being forcibly removed from a home he tried to steal. One of the deputies shoved him toward the back of a waiting squad car. He stumbled, his bare feet slipping on the wet pavement. He caught sight of my SUV parked at the end of the street. Our eyes locked through the windshield, and I let a slow, satisfied smile cross my face. There was no defiance left in him. He looked utterly broken, a pathetic parasite finally scraped off its host. The deputy shoved his head down and forced him into the back seat, slamming the heavy door shut and trapping him in the cramped cage. The 2 trash bags of his pathetic belongings were tossed unceremoniously into the trunk. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated his tear-streaked face as the cruiser pulled away, carrying him toward the county jail for resisting an eviction order. While Bradley was experiencing his very public humiliation, an equally devastating reckoning was unfolding across town. Jamal Vance thought he could outrun the federal government by frantically shredding documents and attempting to move whatever liquid assets he had left into offshore accounts. He severely underestimated the speed and efficiency of Special Agent Thorne and the FBI task force. Precisely as Bradley was being shoved into the squad car, federal agents swarmed Jamal's luxury real estate office downtown. They did not wait for him to finish his morning espresso or consult with his attorneys. A dozen agents wearing tactical vests raided the sleek, glass-walled suite. They seized every computer, froze the servers, and boxed up every single paper file in the building. Jamal was caught completely off guard, attempting to slip out the back service elevator. They tackled him to the polished concrete floor, slapping heavy steel cuffs on his wrists. His arrest was not a quiet, discreet affair. A local news crew, tipped off by a very helpful anonymous source, was waiting right outside the main lobby doors. As Jamal was paraded out of the high-rise office building, camera flashes erupted like strobe lights. The news anchor shoved a microphone in his face loudly, asking for a comment on the multi-million-dollar wire fraud charges and the immediate revocation of his broker license. Jamal kept his head down, using his suit jacket to shield his face, but the damage was already permanently done. The midday broadcast led with the spectacular downfall of the city's self-proclaimed luxury realtor. The anchor detailed the staggering scope of his crimes, broadcasting his complete ruin to the entire city and ensuring his empire of lies was reduced to absolute rubble.